So, atali hai ulukut atiga Andrea Andersen, imi inuvunga ama makovi miunguvunga, Nunatsiavut ulumi kuvia subunga. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. To the Committee on Aboriginal Peoples of the Senate, we are here for one reason today, and that is to discuss this new relationship between the Indigenous people and the rest of Canada. First, I'd like to applaud your reasoning for the naming of the study, as noted again that not all Indigenous groups identify as a nation. So when the government states this new nation-to-nation relationship, it does not identify to me as an Inuk. And second, youth are excited. So this is the first time that the government is creating this new relationship, and you are asking for youth input. It is definitely in the direction of where we need to go. When you take a look around this room, each person comes from a different background, whether it's a different Indigenous origin or being an ally. But we are here for one thing today, to help guide and bring a youthful voice to this topic. You have a year and a half left to tackle the remainder of this study. I don't want to put any pressure, but I am very honored to share my thoughts with you today. I want to be very careful in what I say to you, as many of the urgent topics that myself and many of us have noted to be important have already been highlighted last year, especially in regards to language retention, economic development, suicide prevention, creating mediums and platforms to express our ideas, and also the housing crisis in the North. I am a physiotherapist by profession, so after the session tonight, I'll be doing some assessments over in this corner. But growing up in my community, it's a isolated Inuit community in northern parts of Labrador. I was known as the little girl who sat on every committee. Because I was bored, so I wanted to do something. There wasn't much to do growing up. And today I represent urban Indigenous youth through the Friendship Centre movement. So the Friendship Centre movement is Canada's most significant off-reserve Indigenous service delivery infrastructure. So there's 118 centres across Canada, and each centre is the primary provider of culturally enhanced programs and services to urban Indigenous people. We facilitate the transition of people from rural, remote, and reserve life to an urban environment. For many people, we are the first point of contact, either to obtain referrals for culturally based socioeconomic programs or services. I would like to spread light to the committee in regards to Part C of the study on what areas that the committee should look into. I know you're only in Part A, but I want to get you started thinking of what will need to come. So the first thing, there's three things that I would like to address. The first is the relationship with the federal government and current Indigenous organizations. So for example, the National Association of Friendship Centre. Friendship Centres have a well-known history in Canada. We have been around for 60 years, and we provide many of the same services as what you will find in either a land claim settlement area or on reserve. It is known that more Indigenous people are moving from rural areas to urban centers for various reasons. And we help these people with this transition. However, in the government's eyes, we are not treated the same as other Indigenous organizations like AFN or ITK. We always get the recognition of the wonderful work that we do, but recognition is not what we need. We need more support. We have a huge growing demand, yet we do not receive any infrastructure funding to meet this demand. It is very hard to service your people when the facilities that we provide these programs out of cannot upkeep with the growing numbers. The National Association of Friendship Centres and the Friendship Centre movement is a grassroots movement. So we have an open door policy. We do not just service First Nations or Inuit or Métis. We service all Indigenous groups, and we provide that cultural programming to all of them. So we would like to have the same access to funding resources as the other groups. The second thing that I would like to touch base on is how natural resources are developed on our lands going forward in the future. I know the Senate has completed a study in the past around this topic, but I think it needs to be touched on in this study as well. Now, we're not fully anti-development, but when our resources are taken from our areas, it needs to be done in a way that is with Indigenous people, for Indigenous people, and the Indigenous people need to benefit, and the region that it is on need to benefit as well. And you also have to make sure that the environment is protected while doing so. So, I like to use examples, and I want to give a current example of how this is currently not the case. Labrador, Nalcor, and Muskrat Falls. So there is a 6-year opposition with the Inuit and the Innu of Labrador, where the federal and provincial government have failed to support these Indigenous groups. I'll give you some background information. Nalcor is a provincial crown energy corporation in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. One of its businesses is the Lower Churchill project, which will produce hydroelectric energy. One of their installments is Muskrat Falls. This project is a complete mess, and it does make me angry. I need you to understand that it is 2017, and from this project, in just the past month, not something that's happened 6 months ago, but in this past month, we've had a Labrador community evacuated due to flooding from this hydroelectric project, and we have a Inuk grandmother by the name of Beatrice Hunter. She is placed in a men's correctional facility in St. John's, now ongoing 10 days. She has her hearing on this upcoming Friday. But political leaders in our province are saying they cannot intervene with the justice system. And this is because she stated to the Supreme Court that she might not be able to stay 1 kilometer away from the Muskrat Falls site. So how is this creating a better relationship with Indigenous people? You are putting people in jail and having these communities evacuated. When this project started, there was no community consultations, no consultations with Indigenous leaders, until recently this fall, 3 people had to go on a hunger strike before even the provincial government decided to actually listen to the people of Labrador and to know that we were actually concerned about this project. Canada is so rich in its natural resources, but if it were up to the Indigenous people of any part of Canada, I don't think we would have these corporations in our backyard, preventing our animals to grow and practicing our rights to live on our land. It just would not pass. But unfortunately, we have no say in what happens. And even if we do, it's a real hard fight to prove so. So with this new relationship, we need to strongly push that any natural resource project, whether it's in a land claims agreement area or not, have the following things put in place. So the first is an in-depth community consultation that is recorded and followed up on before any prospecting or even touching the land even begins. And then having regular follow-up community sessions where locals can actually express their concerns. Then the second is hiring locals not only to do the labor work, but also be the managers and higher up personnel. And then if there's no local workers in the education field that is needed, don't start the project until you educate those local Indigenous people to take those roles. And then the last thing is to have independent review boards and researchers who monitor and provide up-to-date data and analysis of these projects. These corporations need to be held accountable for coming onto our Indigenous lands, and this needs to be included in our new partnership. Now, the last thing that I would like to address is who our leaders actually represent. I come from a province, so I currently live in Nunavut, but I have grown up in Newfoundland and Labrador, and currently, over the past 3 years, our Premier is also the Minister responsible for Labrador and Aboriginal Affairs. This person has been responsible for Indigenous issues for 3 years. He is the only minister in the province who has not shown his face in my Nunatsiavut region. He has never grown up in this area, nor is Indigenous. And I want to give an example of this. Nalcor is destroying Indigenous lands in Labrador, preventing Inuit and Innu from hunting on their traditional territory. However, the leader of the government who is supposed to address these issues is the same person who leads our province. The province that, technically speaking, owns the company that is in so much conflict with Indigenous groups. So I urge that in leading forward that it be addressed that no political representation of Indigenous issues be the sole leader of a province. So for these points, I would like for you to remember that Friendship Centers should be given the same opportunity for funding as other friendship centers, as we provide many of the same program and services that other Indigenous organizations receive. We are just in an urban setting. Second, that natural resource corporations need to have community consultations and local approval before any project is started. And the third is Indigenous portfolio should be held by Indigenous people who come from that area and not be the sole leader of that province. I hope my comments have sparked some areas or created more proof for others that you might have already addressed. I do have a question for you. I noticed that Senator Dick stated in December of last year that this newly formed relationship will all depend on the group that we are currently addressing, as not all Indigenous groups are not equal, but the same. So I'm just wondering, will there be a bilateral agreement or some type, like what will the agreements have to be put in place for each Indigenous group? What will they look like? And how will this be implemented in the future government? And as Ms. Adamique stated last year, that there needs to be more opportunity for space for these types of discussions to happen. And I thank you for creating this space today. And I look forward to your comments and questions. Huyanamik.
Thank you, Andrea. The first question from Senator Patterson.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for obviously a very well thought out, well prepared presentation with some real concrete advice. I'd like to ask you, do you think that if the Muskrat Falls project if it had followed the four principles that you mentioned are necessary, do you think there's a chance that the developers might have won support from the Inuit? Because I understand the Innu did reach some kind of an agreement, and it's the Inuit that your community that are really feeling more left out. Might it have been possible to work out a win-win scenario there, do you think? And I wonder, there's a big project in Nunatsiavut, the Voisey's Bay mine. Would you have any comments about how that's working and whether there's more success in engaging or employing Inuit of Nunatsiavut in the heart of their lands in Nain?
Mm-hmm. So when any type of natural resource corporation go on Indigenous lands, there's always a talk of an impacts benefit agreement. Nalcor was smart in this decision because the Muskrat Falls project technically is only on Innu lands. So they created the New Dawn Agreement, which is an impact benefits agreement between the Innu Nation and Nalcor and the provincial government. However, the Inuit have rights to their land claim area. However, the Muskrat Falls site is outside of this land claim area. Inuit occupy the land, but they don't have any say because it's more Innu territory. The things that are concerning now for the Inuit communities that are affected is pretty much a few things that of the other youth that spoke today around natural resource development is the impacts that it's having on communities around road infrastructure. I know Happy Valley Goose Bay is their community council is having to spend more funds repairing roads because of the heavy equipment that's going over the roads on a daily basis. The congestion of busing people in from work, it's slowed down the day-to-day life of the community itself. And there is no response planning happening between the corporation and those communities. So Nalcor's only responsibility is if the dam breaks or gives away, is to just call the community town and say, oh, the dam gave away. They are stated that they are not responsible for any funding or anything that way to actually help in emergency response planning. So when the community of Mud Lake got evacuated last month, Nalcor didn't have to pay a cent of that, even though they lifted some of the, they raised the water level because they lifted some of the doors of the dam. And so in regards to that, those communities, I think they just want to be heard. They want to understand what's happening. There is no communication of saying, this is what we're doing, what do you think of it, and how can we go from there? Because they just came in and did what they said they were going to do. There was no input, and I think you need to have that communication for everyone to be on the same page. In regards to the Voisey's Bay mines, it's different because it is in the Inuit, the Nunatsiavut government land claim area, so Inuit have more control over that area. So they have their hiring processes put in place, they have the scholarships for the youth, and they have many, many training opportunities for young people to go in and to look at the mines. They have training opportunities for people to go and get employment in the area, and they, I think, are a very good example of how a project, like a natural resource project, should be done. They worked with the Inuits on how to, for example, there's a vessel that goes up every year, so it breaks up the ice, and the Inuit can no longer cross that ice floe. So what they did is they came up with a plan and they create a bridge so now the Inuit can still cross the land to go hunting on their traditional territory. So those things, there are many things that need to be set in place, and Voisey's Bay, they've done that because the Inuit leaders made sure it was done. Whereas in Muskrat Falls' case, it's different because it's owned by the government, and they got to the Innu Nation before people actually understood fully what it was going to look like.
Senator Sinclair.
Thank you.
Senator Sinclair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to begin by remarking that for such a little person, you pack a hell of a punch.
Thank you.
And that's meant as a compliment, incidentally. I want you to know that. I listened carefully to what you had to say, particularly around the issue of development and the need for involvement, consultation, and even by implication, I think, in the words that you said, consent. Because if I remember, if I heard you correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought I heard you say that one of the things that you would want to have in place is that there would be agreements before development actually started.
Yep.
So those agreements imply a consent relationship. So have you seen any of those kinds of things ever happen that you could point to as an example?
Yeah, so Labrador is very rich in natural resources, as the rest of Canada, but I speak to it because that's where I come from. And I have an example. Uranium is really big, and Aurora Energy is a company that tried to do some uranium mining, and before they even did any prospecting, they held community meetings and said, this is what we are expecting to do. What do you think? And they made sure that they had the input from people who worked previously in the mines or prospecting, and then they also made sure that they heard from the youth. So they actually went to the schools and talked to the youth and said, this is what we're thinking of doing. what do you think of that? And then they also made monthly, if not yearly, community visits to each community that would be affected on what they are wanting to do. And then they made sure that everything, like the communication of what they were doing, happens. There wasn't an agreement put in place, because you have, as long as they get their, their license to be on the land, then they don't have to have that community consent. So I think there's an opportunity there that, whether it's federal or provincial, I'm not sure. So once you obtain or try to get this permit or license to actually prospect, that there has to be a step where you have to do that community consultation first, and then get a majority of consensus from the communities that are mostly affected. So I don't know if that's something that could be implemented, but it's an idea.
Just for clarification, is that a company that operates within one of the Inuit land claim settlement areas?
Yes. So it is different because there is a land claims area, so they have to be responsible. And it's a different, say, ball game when you're dealing with other natural resource projects like pipelines and fracking and stuff, because there is no land claim that is preventing people from doing that. So I think having that step in the licensing or application process, to have those community consultations before anything is done, could be something that should be looked into, because you're then starting that community consultation.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Andrea, and I would like to address your question to the committee. Thank you very much for going back in our history and looking at what had transpired when we had the youth leaders here last year. And what I would like to ask you is this: do you think that we should go back and look at their testimony? We did have a smaller number of youth leaders the year before. Do you think it would be a good idea if we went back to those transcripts and import their input into our current study? Because at that time we didn't, that was sort of under a general mandate.
Yep.
So you had a very specific question, and we don't know what we're going to recommend in this study, but so you do think we should go back and import that testimony and make it part of the testimony for this particular study?
I think so, because some of the topics that were addressed, especially suicide prevention and the housing crisis in the north, those are things that also need to be addressed. Yep.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for that. And we will now move to our last youth leader this evening, Chris Tate.